Nick Saban has retired from college football, and my first reaction was Missouri's 2024 schedule just got a little bit easier. But you also got to wonder, could Eli Drinkwitz be a candidate for this job? Let's talk about all the Missouri ramifications of this huge news story coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso. Y hoy es mi cumpleaños. So let's get this show on the road, shall we? I got some partying to do today. But speaking of today, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And well, 2024 is here, of course. We're very early in the year, but tons of changes already in the world of football. Just last night, Nick Saban announced his retirement from the University of Alabama and from college football, of course, as a whole. Bill Belichick is gone from New England. That was news that broke this morning. It is indeed a whole new world in football right now on just a whole bunch of different levels. But just to put Nick Saban's run here in perspective at Alabama, 7 national championships total for Saban, 6 with the Crimson Tide. That basically speaks for itself, right? What more needs to be said? Well, I thought this put it maybe even to more perspective. Saw this statistic this morning. During Nick Saban's tenure at Alabama, he had 44 first-round picks and 29 losses. Wow. That is an astonishing number. 2 numbers on a whole lot of different levels there. But, of course, again, it's a whole new world. The past doesn't really matter as much as it used to in college football. The most traditional sport in America, I would say, in terms of, hey, if you were good in the past, there's a good chance you're going to be good in the future as well. Well, that may be changing a little bit with name, image, and likeness and all kinds of stuff. And, frankly, the story is that apparently sources told ESPN that Nick Saban had grown increasingly frustrated with this new world of college football. Saban is into, again, this is the quote here from this ESPN story. It says he's all about team and building a team and developing players. And now the only thing that seems to matter is who can get what in name, image, and likeness, and who can get the biggest deal. Well, a fair bit of perhaps hypocrisy there from Nick Saban, considering, hey, he's at the very top of the food chain in college football, making the absolute most money of anybody. Sure, easy for him to say, hey, I'm not moving anywhere, when, of course, he had been with the Miami Dolphins and the LSU Tigers a previous few years before winding up in Tuscaloosa. So, I don't know. That one didn't exactly sit awesome with me, but you can see how an older gentleman like Saban, sort of like I believe Mike Krzyzewski did for sure, the, of course, great Duke basketball coach, said, you know what? This whole new world here, I'm old. I don't have enough time for this stuff. I kind of can't blame him on that level for maybe saying, okay, I think I've proven enough in this sport. Time to go ride on the old pontoon boat with Miss Terry for the rest of my days. We shall see. But again, for the future, you've already seen a few ripple effects here. 5-star wide receiver Ryan Williams has decommitted from Alabama. So there's one domino that's already fallen. You'll probably see a few more too, because Saban's departure actually opens a 30-day transfer portal window for anybody on Alabama's roster. So somebody like, say Miles McVay, an offensive lineman from East St. Louis that Missouri had recruited in the past. You never know, is my point. I'm just bringing up McVay as an example here of somebody who could be on the move. On the other hand, maybe he's perfectly happy in Tuscaloosa. All I know is he had a really good relationship with Missouri and Drinkwitz. He still follows my podcast, so it's not as though he hates the Missouri Tigers or anything like that. Not trying to start any rumors here, just giving you an example of guys who could potentially be on their way, guys who are really talented players who maybe didn't play that much for the Crimson Tide last season. So here's another thing that people also might forget. Yes, Alabama is currently going to be an absolutely desirable job for basically anybody on the market. But people do forget that Alabama was not the program that it is today before Saban got there. And in fact, the previous decade, they had won 10 games 3 times, finished unranked in the AP poll 5 times in the previous 7 years. And even Rich Rodriguez, by the way, you may remember, he actually turned down the Alabama job at one point. Well, and to be honest, Alabama has still been great the past few seasons, but my God, they haven't actually won a national championship since 2020. So really, in the new world of name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, hey, Alabama has actually lost 2 games each of the past 3 seasons. Now, I get it. Missouri lost 2 games this past season as well, and it was our best season, probably our 3rd best season in the last, 40 years or whatever it's been. Maybe even 50 years, closer to that, I would say. But regardless, I think the point is, whoever is the next coach at Alabama, obviously this is an incredibly desirable job, but following Saban, that's not so easy. There's almost no chance that you're going to be able to live up to what people are expecting now at that program. If you don't win a national title within your first 3 seasons, you're probably going to be considered a failure. At the very least, an SEC title in the first 2 or 3 seasons, I mean, that's some pretty incredible expectations. And for all the candidates that have been thrown out there that I've seen, fortunately, I haven't seen Eli Drinkwitz's name brought up. And I've seen, and probably because, quite honestly, Alabama is indeed such a desirable job that they can shoot higher. And I'm talking really, really high. Like Steve Sarkisian high, the current coach at the University of Texas. Of course, Sarkisian was a bit of a, well, I don't want to use the word rehabilitation with Steve Sarkisian, but it does kind of fit here. I hate to say it, but essentially sort of like Lane Kiffin as well. Hey, there's a name I'm going to bring up here in a minute, but let's stick with Steve Sarkisian. He was the Alabama offensive coordinator for that last national championship during the 2020 season. Obvious ties there. But to me, if you're Sarkisian and you've got it going like you do at the University of Texas, you just made the college football playoff. You just beat Alabama, by the way, in the regular season. Why do you want to get into that meat grinder? You're in a good spot at Texas right now. And by the way, if I had Arch Manning on my roster, yeah, I think I'd want to see how that young man's career plays out, especially being the offensively focused type of coach that he is. But of course, a ton of other big names are out there too. Even Washington's Cale DeBoer, Oregon's Dan Lanning, Ohio State's Ryan Day has even been brought up. But again, Lane Kiffin actually, to me, is maybe the name that makes the most sense. I'd say Mike Norvell of Florida State and Lane Kiffin are, to me, the 2 names that make the most sense out of those. Because if I'm Washington's coach, if I'm Dan Lanning, if I'm Oregon's coach, why do I want to join the SEC and get into that meat grinder? I'm about to join the Big Ten here next season, right? So why do I need to be involved in that? I'm already in the biggest money conference that you can get in, which is the Big Ten currently. Basically, the Big Ten and the SEC, those are the big money conferences, and there's a big, steep drop-off to everybody else. So you're in the big pool swimming with the big sharks already. To me, it's just a little bit easier to win, though, in the Big Ten, especially if Jim Harbaugh is indeed going to the NFL. The longer that goes on, obviously, we'll see, basically, is what I'm trying to say with Jim Harbaugh. But the point is, you'd have to agree that it's a little bit easier to win in the Big Ten than it is in the SEC, right? So to me, it's got to be a place that gives you a better chance to compete for the college football playoff. And you know what? Coming up on the show, I'm going to tell you my prediction, who I think is going to be the next coach at the University of Alabama. Let's also do a hypothetical. What if Eli Drinkwitz does leave? Is there a possibility that he would if Alabama comes calling? Again, all hypotheticals here, but I'm going to give you my prediction on who I think the Tide's next coach is going to be coming up here in just a second. But first, let's talk about Game Time, because you shouldn't have to worry about buying tickets at the last minute for your big event. You know, sometimes when you're waiting till the last minute, you're procrastinating, you don't know who to trust, you don't want to just trust somebody on the street. Well, I'm telling you right now, download the Game Time app. It's the best place to get last minute ticket deals. And in fact, I'm going to fire up the app right now. Let's see what's going on here. I want to go to a St. Louis Blues game soon. Hey, $22 all-in pricing tonight at 7 o'clock. Well, let's fire up the card and get on down I-70. That sounds like a heck of a deal to me. And again, Game Time, you want some more expensive seats, sort it that way. You get a perfect view of every single seat. Just scroll down. It's the simplest thing in the world. Just take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks as always for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. For your second listen, I'd recommend Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. That's Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. And you know what? I'm going to just go ahead and make a prediction. I think your next coach at the University of Alabama is going to be Lane Kiffin, who is, of course, currently at Ole Miss. And, hey, Ole Miss is doing some big things in the transfer portal right now. But as Blake Baker showed us, and, well, we've seen over and over and over again, loyalty is not much of a thing in college football. And Kiffin is a guy who was, of course, under Nick Saban at one point, was his offensive coordinator before Steve Sarkisian of Texas. And I just think, listen, I think last season Lane Kiffin flirted very, very hard with Auburn. So I think he's got a wandering eye already. So if he was flirting that hard with Auburn, it really felt like for a moment that it was almost a done deal that Lane was going to go to that spot. Well, if he's going to go to Auburn, you think he might go to Alabama, especially for, I don't know, 15, 20 million bucks a year? Yeah, I think that's probably what's going to ultimately happen, because again, I just think these guys, for as much as Dan Lanning, yes, he was a graduate assistant at Alabama. He has some ties there as well. I just think if I'm Dan Lanning and I'm Oregon's head coach, again, forget about the Big Ten aspect of it if you don't totally agree with me there. But Oregon, in terms of name, image, and likeness, hey, nobody's really second to Alabama, right? Or Alabama is second to none, is what I should say. But man, Oregon, they're about as close as you can get, I would say, with that Nike money, all that good stuff. I just think, and they're sort of positioned to really strike in California. You know, the Pac-12 is going to be weakened after all this, of course. I mean, not the Pac-12 is going to be weakened. Those Pac-12 schools is what I'm trying to say. Schools like California, schools like Stanford that may have gotten some players that you wanted at Oregon at a certain point. Now, obviously not the 4- and 5-star guys necessarily. I just think Oregon is even more poised to take guys away from UCLA and USC and all that good stuff, and certainly Cal and Stanford and all that kind of thing. I just think Oregon's very much, and Washington as well. Why do you want to, again, get into the meat grinder of not only the SEC, but just the ridiculous expectations of following a guy who I believe already has a statue outside of the stadium? Good luck to whoever follows that particular job. You're going to make a whole bunch of money, but I just don't think that's necessarily something I would want to do. Now, I'd tell my agent to pretend that I wanted it so I could get a pay raise, of course. Come on, that's what Jimmy Sexton is for. Let's not just let the rich people and the rich donors keep their money. We don't want to have that if we're a head coach, right? But in all seriousness, if you're Eli Drinkwitz, let's say Alabama comes calling. Let's say they strike out on all these guys that I just mentioned, on Sarkisian and Kiffin and Mike Norvell and whoever it might be, and maybe Eli Drinkwitz is actually the most attractive candidate out there for the Crimson Tide. Well, if you're a Missouri fan, it's time to get nervous, because if that happens, I honestly don't see how he could say no. As much as he, I think, enjoys Missouri, likes it here. Hey, I think Blake Baker enjoyed it here as well, but not enough to be lured away by LSU, of course. And for as much as I made the case that, again, specifically for Blake Baker in 2024, I thought moving from Missouri's defensive coordinator to being LSU's defensive coordinator was a bit of a lateral move. Now, listen, I made it very clear, like, from a head coaching perspective, you can't make the case that going from Missouri to LSU is a lateral move. So I'm certainly not going to make the case that going from Missouri to Alabama is a lateral move. Not only can they pay Drinkwitz more money, they can pay more with name, image, and likeness. You have the history, the foundation, the incredible sparkling facilities, just everything you could ever possibly want, except for maybe unrealistic expectations. You have it at Alabama, a more fertile recruiting ground geographically. I mean, literally every advantage you can possibly have, Alabama has it over Missouri. That doesn't make me happy to say it, but it's true. So to me, if Drinkwitz comes a candidate there, see you later, buddy. It's been nice knowing you. I just don't think we're going to get there. That's the good news if you're a Missouri fan. But again, putting aside hypotheticals at this point, let's deal with what we know. And we know that next season, Missouri is going to play in Tuscaloosa. That's obviously the toughest game on paper on Missouri's schedule. And fortunately, that game just got a little bit easier, I think. I think you have to assume that Alabama is not going to be as good with Nick Saban without Nick Saban next year as they would have been with him. I think that's a pretty simple thing to say. If you're just going to assume that everything is going to be perfect and peachy and rosy, listen, I know Alabama is going to be good again next season. I can almost guarantee that Missouri is going to be an underdog in that game next season. I get it. But not having Nick Saban, I'm just telling you, it makes a difference. It has to. We can't go on and on about how this guy is the greatest coach in the history of college football and then also not maybe say he's worth, 2 or 3 points on the point spread. I'm not going to go crazy about it, but at the same time, it just got a little bit easier. A very manageable schedule for 2024 for Missouri. I wouldn't call it easy. There is no such thing as an easy schedule in the SEC, but relatively speaking, yeah, an absolutely manageable schedule for Missouri in 24. Just got a tiny bit easier. And if you love offense in the game of football, well, the Cotton Bowl was not necessarily the most aesthetically pleasing game in the world, but it sure seemed like a ton of casual fans tuned into the Cotton Bowl. Some huge numbers from that game were set by Missouri and Ohio State. So I want to talk about that coming up here in just a little bit. And also, who is more likely to be fired in 2024? Is it Eli Drinkwitz or is it Brian Kelly? You'll see where I'm going with that here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about FanDuel Sportsbook, because the NFL regular season is over, but the playoffs are here, and now's the time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And honestly, go ahead and put your $5 on the Kansas City Chiefs. Minus 230 money line, or go minus 4.5. I could kind of go either way here. I just don't think the Dolphins have it. I really don't. In a 0-degree weather, a team from South Florida is going to come into Arrowhead Stadium and win. I don't think so. I kind of think the league has figured out Tua as well. He doesn't want to hang in there and take too many hits. He's getting the ball out of his hands really quickly. I'm not overly confident in the Chiefs for the rest of the playoffs, but you know what? In this first round game on Peacock, I think they're going to get the job done. But whether you agree with me or disagree, you got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an easy chip shot extra point. It's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So not only was that one of the biggest victories in Missouri history, of course, I'm talking about the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State, but one of the most watched games certainly in Missouri history as well, with a 9.6 rating, peaking out with 10.7 million viewers on that Friday night, the most streamed college football game ever on ESPN Plus. This is all according to ESPN's PR release here. And that was up 11% year over year over the previous Cotton Bowl. Again, any non-semifinal game, that was the highest rated college football, the highest rated Cotton Bowl that was not part of the college football playoff. So great to see just a ton of eyeballs on Missouri. Well, basically at the peak of its program. A beautiful thing to see there. Hopefully Missouri can continue that momentum without question. And by the way, of course, I've talked a ton about Blake Baker making his move to LSU and how I called that a lateral move, basically just pointing out that there's some real risk there. And by the way, the transient nature of that, how long is Blake Baker going to realistically be a defensive coordinator at LSU anyway? If you think about it, who's more likely to get fired next season? What would Eli Drinkwitz have to do next season to get fired? Go 1-11 or something like that? It would have to be the most ridiculously bad season in history for that to happen. But Brian Kelly in year 3 here, if they go 500 and the defense doesn't really turn around, I could absolutely see them pulling a Jimbo Fisher, paying him a ton of money to go away and take the buyout and go play golf somewhere. I could absolutely see that happening. I'm not saying it's likely. I just think it's a lot more likely than Eli Drinkwitz getting fired. So that's, to me, again, part of the calculus there, or at least should have been part of the calculus, in my opinion, for Blake Baker. Hey, I'm just putting my values into his head. Everybody has their own values. So, again, whatever is in his head, I can't read his mind, of course. I'm just kind of trying to tell you how I would think the whole thing through. If I'm trying to be a head coach, hey, how about one more year at Missouri where I'm already established, have a great season in 2024? I'm almost certainly going to be a head coaching candidate at the Power 5 level. Hey, same is still the case at LSU. I'll give you that. If he has a good season, turns that defense around, he might even be a slightly more attractive candidate than he would have been at Missouri. I just think there's more risk there than there is at Missouri. I guess Blake Baker is more of a risk taker than I am. Now, one guy I can promise you, who of all these massive candidates, I can promise you Kirby Smart is not going to be going to Alabama, but I cannot promise you that he's not going to go to the NFL. I could see a scenario where Kirby Smart gets thrown $25 million a year or something to go coach the Atlanta Falcons. How about that? Could you see that happening? I think that's a slight possibility. I don't really think it's likely, but if that happens, man, the SEC parity era will truly be upon us. With Nick Saban gone, heck, if Kirby goes to the Atlanta Falcons, I don't really think this is going to happen. But even regardless, it just seems like, again, back to the lateral move thing. I'm sorry, for as much as LSU obviously has a better football history than Missouri, Alabama, same deal. Hey, if you're a head coach, it's not a lateral move. I'm just saying in terms of assistant coaches, if you're going to be going back and forth every year anyway, I just think the difference between Missouri and LSU, that gap is closing with each passing year here, it would seem, during the name, image, and likeness era. I just don't think in 2024, I think the Tigers have as good a chance to win as just about anybody in this conference, especially with Nick Saban off to the golf course. Now, Georgia, they're still the cream of the crop, let's be honest. Everybody else, I say bring them on. But you know what? Thanks for bringing on another episode of Locked On Mizzou. Appreciate you making this show your first listen every day. And for your second listen, once again, check out Locked On Sports Today for the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Go over there and subscribe to Locked On Sports Today. So until next time, I'm John Miller, and thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.